Welcome to Cross-Examined, a podcast by the Law Institute of Victoria.
Welcome to Cross-Examined. My name is Karen Finch. I'm the Head of Legal Policy and Innovation at the Law Institute of Victoria. Today, we're exploring some important questions facing our courts and legal systems. What happens when we hand decision-making power to algorithms that might carry invisible biases? What does fairness look like when it's built into code? How do we hold systems accountable when we may not fully understand how they work? And what does justice mean when the decision maker is a black box? To help us untangle these questions, we're very lucky to have Professor Jeannie Marie Paterson with us today. Jeannie is a Professor of Law at the University of Melbourne and a co-founding director of CADE, or the Centre for Artificial Intelligence and Digital Ethics for those not familiar with the acronym. Jeannie's research informs courts and government inquiries, and she collaborates with technologists and health experts on responsible AI for high-risk settings. Jeannie is also a Fellow of the Australian Academy of Law, and her work sits at the intersection of consumer protection, AI regulation, bias and liability. Jeannie, welcome to Cross-Examined.
I'm delighted to be here.
And we are so delighted to have you. So let's get into it. We've got lots of questions to get through. Let's start with the opportunity. What's the value proposition of AI in legal work, and where do you see it making the biggest practical difference for lawyers and their clients?
Well, the opportunities for AI in law are almost unlimited, and I think we're still seeing the creative imagination of technologists and lawyers of what it can do. But at the moment, I think probably most attention is on the tools that do document work or low-level diagnostic work. And that sounds boring, but it's tremendously time-saving for lawyers, provided they use the technology properly. So tools can interrogate documents, they can draft emails, they can summarise long policy documents that have been produced by governments, they can summarise cases, and they can do preliminary research. And before the audience shrieks and goes, don't rely on it, I said low-level diagnostic work. These AI tools are a great beginning for the value-added intellectual work that lawyers do and is at core of their function, which is applying analytical skills, judgment, knowledge to those raw materials that they can use AI to bring together.
Love that. And so let's now go down the journey, walking through what happens when legal decision-making systems operate without sufficient, say, oversight or clarity about how they're working.
Well, we're now moving to the horror scenario because we can use AI to help lawyers do their legal work. We can use it for low-level diagnostics, but it's also possible to be using AI tools in other ways to make predictions. And predictive AI, which is trained to find patterns in data and make predictions about future occurrences or patterns or predilections, is really useful in all sorts of areas. That's how a lot of medical AI works, by being trained to make predictions about particular progression of diseases or what the reading on a scan might mean. We can use that in law as well. We can use that for predictions about recidivism. We can use it for predictions about appropriate bail. We can use it for predictions about how courts perform. We can use it for predictions about likely outcomes of cases. But when using predictive AI in legal context raises a lot of risks, because what we know about predictive AI is it can get it wrong, it can amplify existing historical biases, and it's really hard to interrogate. And there is the error hallucination problem if we're talking about generative AI. So AI comes with a number of risks, a bundle of risks, and it's really important for anybody using the technology to understand what the risks are so they can put in place the precautions to alleviate its risks and, in fact, make the decision about where AI is most useful for them.
And we've seen in the past some of those big things about the predictive technologies with, say, COMPAS and Robodebt, and now we're seeing it move into those hallucinations. So what can we learn from the COMPAS situation or the Robodebt, or now where we are now with those hallucinations?
So just to go back and explain the Robodebt COMPAS examples, I'm sure most listeners will know, but Robodebt was the use of an algorithm to compare tax returns and Centrelink payments with the aim of identifying who might be defrauding the system. And the algorithm was a pretty straightforward algorithm. It was comparing two databases to find discrepancies. The algorithm was premised on a mistaken understanding of the law, and therefore people were asked to repay sums that weren't in fact owing. COMPAS is a US example. The COMPAS system is an algorithm that's used to predict recidivism and used for the purposes of bail and, in fact, some sentencing in some US states. The algorithm itself is based on a number of actuarial factors about who's likely to reoffend based on their social background, their life experience. The problem with the COMPAS algorithm is that the consequence of that algorithm is it tends to suggest that black offenders are more likely to reoffend. They're more high risk, so the consequences fall more heavily on black offenders, which isn't acceptable in modern society and is a reflection of historical policing patterns where police were more heavily found in black neighbourhoods and other factors in the US. But the problem with both of those systems is those algorithms, particularly the COMPAS algorithm, people don't really know what factors are in there. They don't know how they work. It's not, in the word that we use in AI governance or AI ethics, it's not transparent. And if something's not transparent, it's very hard to interrogate it. It's very hard to scrutinise its use. It's very hard to make decisions about appropriate use. And it's very hard to govern.
And so just touching on and delving a little bit into that transparency, I think that now that we've got these generative AI systems that are creating these hallucinations, and I know you've got some figures that we can look at, what do you think that the lawyer out there that's listening to this needs to actually understand about the transparency in how these systems are trained and designed?
Yeah, so lawyers who will be listening go, that's okay, I'm not using an algorithm to predict a sentence or decide whether someone is defrauding the government. I'm using, or I'd like to use AI to review documents or help me with preparation for a case I'm running or draft my emails. What could go wrong there? Well, it's kind of the same issue in the sense that the algorithm is only as good as the data it's trained on. And most of the legal tech tools are still premised on generative AI, such as OpenAI, and then they've been refined for legal work, which means they're better at legal language. And they're often using a retrieval method where their answers are being drawn from legal documents, but they're still just based on statistics. And therefore errors can happen. So hallucinations mean it's an output. If you're doing research, you're given information about the law or a case that looks realistic but is completely false, or looks realistic and the citations are false. And a lot of people will go, well, that's not a hallucination, because a hallucination suggests a mental state. An algorithm has no mental state, it's just an error. The way it is a hallucination is that generative AI works by having learnt the relationship between different kinds of words so that it can produce an output that sounds realistic. It's producing a kind of word salad. And usually that makes sense, but sometimes it doesn't. And that's the sense in which hallucinations are hallucinations. It's a word salad. It sounds reasonable, or it kind of sounds reasonable, but it may have no factual basis. Now, the AI is getting better. Hallucinations are being reduced by things like the use of RAGs, retrieval augmented generation. Most of the legal tools that we're being given will tell you they've reduced the prevalence of hallucination. They simply can't get rid of it altogether, because that's the way in which generative AI works, is by throwing words together. So hallucinations are part and parcel of that, or errors if you don't like that term. There is a database that you can look at that lists the number of cases that have gone to courts across the world where the court has identified hallucinated references, erroneous references. That number is now at 853 cases that have been identified by courts. Now, what we don't know, Karen, as you mentioned to me earlier, is whether that's the tip of the iceberg, or if it's, in fact, if that's a small proportion of all the cases where AI is used, or if it's a large proportion of all the cases that AI has been used. We don't know. And why don't we know? Because there's very little data on the effectiveness of these tools, and we still haven't picked up all the cases where things have gone wrong. So it's a bit of a scary figure in that context.
It certainly is. And I think that's the really important thing to emphasise there, given what you've just shared with us, is ensuring if you're a lawyer out there listening, go and interrogate the source. Don't take it at face value. And I've been listening to a podcast recently that was talking a lot about generative AI wants to do the right thing by the person that's putting in. They really want to please us as humans. And often they will give us the answer they think that we want. So if you're looking for a case and you really want that case to help your client, then they're likely to give you a case whether it's real or not. So really understanding that interrogation and, like you say, making sure that you're going back to the resources, not taking it on the face values.
So that's a really interesting point, because generative AI is also sycophantic. It's trying to give the result that we want. It's a kind of bias, actually, that it's biased towards predicting the output that we actually want as opposed to the output that may be inconvenient. And in that context, we have to check, as lawyers, accuracy is particularly important for lawyers, so we need to check the outputs of the generative AI. So then the question's raised of, well, why is it useful? Is there any value in the use of that tools? And I think that what's happening is we're seeing the development of the legal tools that are available on the market can't remove the risk of hallucination altogether or the risk of error altogether, but they're making it easier or more amenable for people to check. So now if you use even a free-to-air tool, it'll give you little references down the side of the propositions that you can click on and check the source. And if you're using a specifically designed legal tech tool, it will give you little references down the side that you can click on and check the output of the AI. So the value proposition is that the lawyer still needs to check, but that speed of checking is speeded up because it can be done quite easily. That's a form of transparency, which is saying this is how the results were produced. But that moves the challenge from lawyers from understanding that they need to check to dedicating the time to checking. Because if we have 853 cases occurring that have been identified by courts, I used to think that those cases were people who didn't understand the technology, so they just made a mistake. They didn't understand about hallucinations. But there's been so much press about hallucinations in legal cases, I think a lawyer would have to be living under a rock not to know this problem. So now I think it may be that people are too strapped for time. They know they should check, but they're not taking the time to check, and they just need to do it. That needs to be part and parcel of the legal duty of care and skill, is that we have a system and process for ensuring that any outputs from AI are scrutinised in the appropriate way.
So moving on to the regulatory or the governance changes that you think the legal profession may need to make to ensure AI is being used safely in legal decision-making, there's been a lot of promise, and I'm not sure about the delivery of whether it's going to improve access to justice. But it seems like bias has been seen in the context of affecting vulnerable people. What's your view on regulatory or governance changes?
It's difficult to think about how we regulate or govern this technology when the legal profession is still working out how to use it. Because I've said a couple of times, at the moment, AI in the law in Australia is being used, if at all, for sort of administrative back office purposes, perhaps organising documents or keeping client records, or diagnostic work. So this sort of drafting, summarised I've spoken about. How do we regulate a use that's moving? How do we regulate that sort of use? Is there a potential for AI to be used more actively in the core work of lawyers? You've just mentioned decision-making. So decision-making by lawyers about how they pursue clients' cases, or courts in decision-making. There's this sort of constant pressure for the AI to move closer to the core function of lawyers and judges and barristers. We're still deciding where the safe space is and what it means for us. So it's hard to think about a regulatory system, except that lawyers are already subject to ethical and legal obligations. And those ethical and legal obligations are expressed as principles. Principles such as use care and skill in doing our legal work, the duty to the court, the duty to the client, avoiding conflicts. And I think actually all of those ethical and legal duties can help lawyers navigate this new, evolving, really quickly changing world of AI. But they've got to remind themselves of what those duties require and constantly be reevaluating their use of the technologies in the light of those duties. And they can only do that if they have a high level of understanding about the technologies and there is transparency about the use of the technology. So it still comes back to those core values, I think, at this point in time.
And your view on access to justice?
There's been so much rhetoric about AI improving access to justice, and the examples of where that's done are fairly narrow. So, for example, there's the Do Not Pay bot, which would produce and does produce letters for people who are subject to parking or other fines to help them explain why they got the fine or why they shouldn't have the fine. But that's a really simple system. That's not a particularly sophisticated AI. It's a simple old, here's the problem, here's the letter system. We've got the Justice Connect triage tool, which is helping to understand the problems people that approach Justice Connect looking for legal support and advice and translate their problem into legal language so that the issue can be referred appropriately. But beyond that, we haven't really seen a lot of movement. A lot of unrepresented litigants are using AI, free legal AI tools, so like ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, to produce their pleadings for court. And what we're hearing is that those pleadings have become very long. They've become word salad, in fact, which is creating problems for courts in how to manage those. But I guess we shouldn't think that's surprising, because if the choice is use AI to help you navigate court or nothing, then obviously the choice of the AI from the perspective of the unrepresented litigant is a good choice and is going to, from their perspective, help them. So that's a real question for courts about how they manage the unrepresented litigant with long word salad submissions. But it's also a challenge for lawyers to really get behind the rhetoric about, well, AI can help access to justice by thinking about the kinds of tools that they might be able to be designed that help people navigate court. And there's no reason why, instead of using a general AI tool, we could not start to make available to litigants a legal AI that perhaps doesn't write all of their submission, but helps them navigate that court process. We've been promising that for a long time, but it just hasn't quite come to fruition. And it probably requires a really genuine and deep conversation between technologists, courts, and lawyers about how, even in small ways, the technology can assist people to solve their legal problems.
That's right. And the elephant in the room is, could potentially lawyers be fixing their costs because they're using these generative AI tools, and maybe then self-represented litigants might have a third choice, which could be going to lawyers and actually getting lawyers because there'll be a lower price point.
I think that's absolutely right. And if lawyers really do believe that they are different from an AI, that lawyers bring something to legal decision-making that's not possible through AI at this point in time, which is what lawyers say. They say, well, we've got judgment and experience and expertise and intuition and the like. If that is really true, that lawyers do bring something, then lawyers should be looking to make those special skills available to the widest possible category of people, and they should be thinking about how they can add value to what they do using AI to broaden the scope of the services that they provide. So I think that's absolutely right. And actually, I know that is a particular passion of yours, Karen, and I'm looking forward to seeing movement on that particular topic.
Me too, Jeannie, me too. So this leads us on very nicely to my next question, which is, what are you most optimistic about? And what do you think is working and what is needed to use AI more ethically? What's your most optimistic approach?
Well, I'm pretty optimistic about AI generally, in the sense that it's a technology that is being offered to us that I think can help us in our day-to-day work, as you say, perhaps even to bring legal costs down, and quite frankly, which we can't avoid. And so therefore, we kind of need to jump in and use it creatively and see what can be done for the betterment of society. If you look across to the medical field, there's lots of examples where AI is starting to make real changes for the better health of the community in terms of early diagnosis of disease. People have different views about AI scribes, but helping doctors manage their administrative processes in a way that's more effective. I think the main thing for me is that we as humans do still have control. There's a lot of catastrophic discussion about AI, that agentic AI is going to take over from humans and make decisions that are systemically bad for humanity. I think we're not quite at that point yet. So I do have just this belief that if we all have a go, put up our sleeves, learn how to use the technology, learn how to use it well, and then apply our creative human minds to ways in which it can make the world a better place. And just small details might be that I have to spend less time on emails, or it might be that you get to bring costs down for lawyers while still earning an income that allows them to pay their rent. That we can make real change. So that's my optimistic perspective.
And I'm going to unveil my crystal ball here and ask, what do you think AI is going to look like in the year 2036?
Well, I have no idea. We established the Centre for AI and Digital Ethics in 2020, which was before generative AI. And people at that point were saying, why have you done this? AI is not that significant. And yet, a few years later, generative AI burst onto the scene. And there you go. Everybody's interested in the topic of ethical AI and AI regulation. So I have no idea what we'll be doing in 2036. But what I hope is that people take that challenge of becoming literate in AI, even if they don't want to use it, become literate in how the technology works so that you can make informed decisions about the role it should have in your practice, in your society, in your day-to-day life. And if you're a person who is in a leadership role, you need to be putting in governance strategies to make sure that the AI that is undoubtedly being used officially or unofficially in your practice or your business is being used in a way that is ethical and responsible and transparent.
And don't forget the supervision, which is the most important thing as well.
That's
alongside.
Right. That's right. We can't just leave it. I sometimes hear, leave the AI to the junior lawyers. That's not how it works. Everybody needs to be responsible for the use of AI. And if you're a more senior lawyer relying on the work of junior lawyers, you need to know how they might be using the technology to ask the right questions. And junior lawyers still need guidance and training.
Love it. Well, there's so much more we could explore, Jeannie. But unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. So thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Total pleasure.
And thank you to everyone that's listened to Cross Examine today. You'll find links to the resources from the Law Institute of Victoria, Jeannie's research, and the Centre for Artificial Intelligence and Digital Ethics, aka CADE, in the show notes. If you found this episode useful, please share it with your colleagues and ensure you subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. Until next time, thanks for listening to Cross Examined.